The rain started just after midnight. The streets were almost empty, and the city lights reflected on the wet road. Angela Brooks drove slowly, her hands steady on the wheel. Someone had recorded the arrest from across the street. The rain, the flashing police lights, and Angela standing calmly in handcuffs quickly caught people's attention. Within hours, thousands of people watched it online. By afternoon, it had spread across the city. Some viewers said the officers were only doing their job. Others said the arrest looked unnecessary. Many people noticed how calm Angela remained while the officers sounded angry and impatient. The comments kept growing. Why would she stop? She didn't look dangerous. Something feels wrong here. News pages began sharing short clips. Local reporters tried to find more information about the woman in the video, but very little appeared online. Angela Brooks did not give interviews. She did not post statements. She did not respond to messages. Instead, she went back to her normal routine. That morning, Angela woke up early, dressed neatly, and left her apartment like any other day. She walked through the city quietly, ignoring the people who looked at her twice after recognizing her face. Inside, she felt tired, but her expression stayed calm and controlled. She knew attention would grow. She also knew that speaking too soon could make things worse. Meanwhile, at the police station, Officers Daniels and Reed were not worried. They believed the video showed only a small part of the situation. In their report, they described Angela as uncooperative. They were sure the department would support them. People online always complain, Daniels said, shrugging. It'll die down in a few days. But it didn't. A young local journalist named Marcus Hill watched the video again and again. Something about Angela's behavior stood out to him. She did not act like someone scared of the system. She looked certain. Marcus began searching public records. At first, he found nothing unusual. Angela Brooks was a common name. But after hours of searching, one result made him stop. The name appeared in legal documents connected to the district court. Marcus frowned. Could it be the same person? He checked again, comparing photos from old public events. The same calm eyes. The same composed posture. His heart raced as he realized what he might have discovered. Across town, Angela sat quietly at her desk, reading documents. The viral video played silently on a small screen nearby. She watched only for a moment before turning it off. She was not interested in public opinion. She cared about something else, the truth. Days passed, and pressure began building on the police department. Internal supervisors asked questions. The officers were told to prepare for a formal hearing. Still, they remained confident. It's just procedure, Reed said. Nothing serious. Then the court date was officially announced. The officers arrived at the courthouse early on the morning of the hearing. Reporters stood outside, cameras ready. The situation suddenly felt bigger than they expected, but they still believed they were in control. Inside the courtroom, people filled the seats. Whispered conversations echoed through the room. The officers sat at their table, waiting. The door at the side of the courtroom opened. Angela Brooks entered, dressed professionally, her face calm as always. The officers noticed her immediately. Confusion crossed their faces. Why was she entering from that door? She did not look at them as she walked forward. Instead, she moved toward the front of the courtroom. The room slowly became silent. Then someone whispered, barely loud enough to hear. That's the judge. The officer's smiles disappeared. Angela stepped behind the bench, placed her files down, and looked across the courtroom for the first time. Her expression showed no anger, no pride, only professionalism. The same woman they arrested in the rain now sat above them, ready to preside over the case. And for the first time since that night, the officers felt something they did not expect. Fear. The courtroom felt different now. Only minutes earlier, people were whispering and moving in their seats. Now, silence filled the room. Every eye was fixed on the woman sitting behind the judge's bench. Angela Brooks adjusted the papers in front of her calmly. Her face showed no anger, no pride, and no sign of revenge. She looked exactly the same as she had on the night of the arrest. Calm, controlled, and quiet. But everything had changed. Officers Daniels and Reed sat frozen at their table. Their confidence from earlier was gone. They looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The woman they had handcuffed in the rain was now the judge presiding over their case. Daniel swallowed hard. "This can't be happening," he whispered. Their lawyer leaned closer, speaking quietly. "Stay calm. She still has to follow the law." Angela looked across the courtroom. For a brief moment, her eyes met the officers, but her expression did not change. She treated them the same way she treated everyone else in the room. "This court will now come to order," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. The hearing began with simple procedures. Charges were read. Reports were presented. Angela listened carefully, occasionally making notes. She did not interrupt or show emotion, even when the officers described the night in a way that sounded very different from what the video showed. To the public watching, her calmness was surprising. Many expected anger or tension. Instead, Angela behaved exactly as a judge should, fair and professional. But inside the courtroom, the pressure continued to grow. The prosecution requested permission to review the full body camera footage from both officers. The defense tried to delay, arguing that the video online did not show the full situation. Angela listened quietly before responding. "The court believes full transparency is necessary," she said. "The footage will be reviewed." A soft murmur moved through the audience. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They remembered the footage. Every word, every decision. Things that felt small at the time now felt dangerous. As the hearing paused for a short break, reporters rushed outside to share updates. The story had already become bigger than anyone expected. A judge presiding over her own arrest case was rare, and people across the city were now paying attention. Inside her private chamber, Angela sat alone for a moment. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering the night of the arrest. The rain, the cold handcuffs, the way people watched without understanding what was happening. But she pushed the memory away. This was not personal. It could not be. Years earlier, Angela had promised herself that if she ever reached this position, she would never allow emotion to control justice. She had worked too hard to get there. Long nights studying. Years of being underestimated. Moments when people doubted her because of who she was. She had learned patience. She had learned discipline. And now, those lessons mattered more than ever. When the court resumed, Angela returned to the bench. The officers avoided looking at her. For the first time, they realized this was no longer a simple case report. Every detail mattered now. Angela spoke again, her tone calm but firm. "This court will review all available evidence before making any judgment. The law applies equally to everyone." Her words carried weight. The courtroom understood the message. This was not about revenge. This was about truth. As the session ended for the day, the officers stood slowly, their earlier confidence completely gone. Outside, cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions they could not answer. Inside the courtroom, Angela gathered her files quietly. The next hearing would include the full body cam footage that had never been shown publicly before. And deep down, everyone in that room knew one thing. Once the truth was played on that screen, nothing would be the same again. The courtroom was full long before the hearing began. Reporters filled the back rows. Community members stood along the walls. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The story had spread far beyond the city now. People were waiting to see the truth. At the front of the room, Officers Daniels and Reed sat quietly beside their lawyer. They looked tired. The confidence they once had was gone. Neither of them spoke much. They both knew today would be different. When Judge Angela Brooks entered, the room stood up. She took her seat calmly, her face professional as always. She looked at the courtroom, then down at the files in front of her. "This court will now review the body camera footage from the night of the arrest," she said. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen turned on. At first, the video looked ordinary. Rain falling, police lights flashing. Angela's car pulled over to the side of the road. The officers approached the vehicle. But as the footage continued, small details became clear. The tone of the officers' voices sounded sharp from the beginning. Angela's voice remained calm and respectful. She asked simple questions. She followed instructions. She never raised her voice. The room became very quiet. In the video, One officer claimed she looked nervous. But the footage showed something else, a woman standing still, hands visible, trying to understand why she had been stopped. Then came the moment when the situation changed. Without clear explanation, the officer grabbed her wrist. Angela's surprised voice could be heard asking what she had done wrong. The sound of the handcuffs clicking echoed through the courtroom speakers. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The video continued playing. One officer laughed while speaking to his partner. Another ignored Angela's questions completely. When the footage ended, silence filled the room. No one spoke for several seconds. The officer's lawyer stood up quickly, trying to explain that the situation had felt threatening in the moment. He argued that officers sometimes must act quickly to protect themselves. Angela listened carefully. She did not interrupt, but the tension in the room had changed. The video had shown more than words ever could. The prosecution then presented the written report filed by the officers that night. As the statements were read aloud, differences between the report and the video became clear. Small details did not match. Certain actions described in the report were not visible in the footage. Whispers spread across the courtroom. Daniels wiped sweat from his forehead. Reed stared at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Angela finally spoke. This court reminds all parties that accuracy in official reports is a serious responsibility, she said calmly. Her voice was not angry, but it carried weight. Just as the hearing seemed ready to end, the prosecutor stood again. Your Honor, he said, the state has an additional witness who wishes to speak. The room stirred with curiosity. A middle-aged man walked forward nervously. He explained that he had been driving past the scene that night. He had stopped and recorded part of the arrest from another angle, footage that had not been seen before. The new video was played. From this angle, the moment of arrest looked even clearer. Angela's hands were visible the entire time. She made no sudden movement. The officer's decision appeared rushed and unnecessary. The air in the courtroom felt heavy. For the first time, the officers looked truly worried. Angela remained still, watching carefully. She showed no reaction, but everyone could feel the seriousness of the moment. The witness stepped down, and the courtroom fell silent again. Angela looked across the room before speaking. This court will review the new evidence carefully before the next hearing, she said. Her gavel struck once, ending the session. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed to share the update. Public opinion was beginning to shift. What once looked like a simple arrest now looked like something much deeper. Inside, Daniels and Reed sat quietly, realizing the situation was slipping out of their control. And as Angela gathered her files, one truth became impossible to ignore. This case was no longer only about one night. It was about a pattern that was slowly coming into the light. The next hearing brought even more attention. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse. People gathered early, hoping to find a seat inside. What started as a single arrest had now become a serious case watched by the entire city. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. Officers Daniels and Reed looked tense. Their uniforms were neat, but their faces showed exhaustion. They knew the new evidence had changed everything. When Judge Angela Brooks entered, the room stood in silence. She took her seat calmly, her expression steady. She looked neither angry nor satisfied. She looked focused. This court will continue reviewing evidence related to the case, she said. The prosecutor stood and announced that new records had been requested from the police department. These records included past complaints made against the two officers. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. The defense objected immediately, arguing that past complaints were unrelated. But the prosecutor explained that the complaints showed possible patterns in behavior, which could help explain what happened the night of Angela's arrest. Angela listened carefully before making her decision. The court will allow the records to be reviewed, she said firmly. The documents were brought forward. One by one, previous incidents were described. Several citizens had reported being stopped without clear reason. Some claimed they were treated with unnecessary aggression. Most cases had been closed without serious investigation. As each report was read, the officers grew more uncomfortable. What once seemed like small, forgotten incidents now returned to the surface. The courtroom listened closely. A young woman stepped forward as a witness. Her hand shook slightly as she spoke. She described being stopped by the same officers months earlier. She said she felt humiliated and powerless, but never filed a formal complaint because she believed nothing would change. Her voice cracked as she spoke, and the room became very still. Angela watched quietly, her face neutral. She did not react emotionally, but her attention never left the witness. More testimonies followed. None of them alone proved guilt, but together they painted a troubling picture. The same tone, the same assumptions, the same unnecessary escalation. The defense tried to argue that policing was difficult and stressful. They said officers often made quick decisions in uncertain situations. But the tension in the room showed that people were beginning to see the situation differently. For the first time, Daniel spoke directly. "We were just doing our jobs," he said, his voice lower than before. "We never meant to hurt anyone." The words sounded less confident now, more defensive. Angela allowed the statement, but reminded everyone calmly, "Intent does not remove responsibility." The sentence echoed through the courtroom. As the hearing continued, internal police emails were presented. Some supervisors had noted concerns about the officer's behavior in the past, but had taken no serious action. The revelation surprised many people in the room. This was no longer only about two officers. It was about a system that had ignored warning signs. The pressure grew heavier with every passing minute. When the session finally neared its end, the prosecutor requested a final hearing to determine accountability and consequences. The defense agreed, knowing there was little choice left. Angela looked across the courtroom before speaking. "This court will schedule a final hearing," she announced. "At that time, all evidence and testimony will be considered before a final decision is made." Her voice remained calm, but the meaning was clear. The end was approaching. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as people debated the case. Some called it justice. Others called it overdue accountability. The city waited for the final outcome. Inside, Daniels and Reed sat silently after everyone began leaving. The reality of their situation had finally settled in. What once felt like a routine arrest had turned into something much larger than they ever expected. Across the room, Angela gathered her files slowly. She knew the next hearing would not only decide the officer's future, it would send a message to everyone watching. And as she walked out of the courtroom, one thought remained clear. The truth was no longer hidden. Now, it was time for judgment. The day of the final hearing arrived quietly, but the tension in the city was stronger than ever. Outside the courthouse, people gathered early. Some came to support justice. Others came simply to see how the story would end. News cameras waited at every corner. What began as one late-night arrest had become a case everyone was talking about. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy. Officers Daniels and Reed sat beside their lawyer, both unusually silent. Their faces showed stress and sleepless nights. The confidence they once carried was completely gone. They understood now that this hearing would decide more than their careers. It would decide how they would be remembered. When Judge Angela Brooks entered, the room stood in respect. She took her seat calmly, just as she had in every hearing before. Her expression revealed nothing. She looked focused only on the law. "This court will now begin the final hearing," she said. Her voice was steady, but everyone felt the importance of the moment. The prosecution began by summarizing the evidence. The body camera footage, the witness recordings, the differences between the reports and the video, the past complaints. Each detail was presented clearly, building a picture that could no longer be ignored. The courtroom listened in silence. Then came the testimonies. One by one, people who had previous encounters with the officers stepped forward. Some spoke calmly. Others struggled to hold back emotion. They described fear, confusion, and feeling powerless during their encounters with law enforcement. None of them shouted. None of them asked for revenge. They only spoke about how those moments stayed with them long after the encounters ended. Daniels lowered his head as he listened. Reed stared forward, his jaw tight. For the first time, the weight of their actions seemed real to them. When it was the defense's turn, Their lawyer argued that the officers had worked under pressure. He said mistakes can happen in difficult situations. He asked the court to consider their years of service. Angela listened carefully, writing notes as both sides spoke. She asked a few quiet questions, always focused on facts rather than emotion. Then something unexpected happened. Daniels asked to speak. The courtroom grew still as he stood up slowly. His voice was not strong like before. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said. "But looking back, maybe we stopped listening." The words surprised many people in the room. It was not a full apology, but it was the first sign of regret. Reed nodded quietly beside him, but said nothing. Angela watched calmly. She did not react emotionally. Her responsibility was not to judge feelings, but actions. After hours of testimony, the courtroom grew quiet again. Everyone knew the moment was close. Angela looked down at her notes, then up at the people in front of her. The officers, the witnesses, the reporters, the community members filling every seat. "This case is not only about one arrest," she said slowly. "It is about responsibility, trust, and the power given to those who enforce the law." Her words carried through the silent room. She explained that law enforcement requires fairness and restraint. When that responsibility is ignored, trust is broken, and rebuilding that trust takes time. The officers sat still, listening carefully. Angela paused, taking a slow breath. The final decision was ready, but the weight of it could be felt by everyone present. "This court will now recess briefly before delivering its final ruling," she announced. The gavel struck once. The room exploded into quiet conversation as people stood and whispered. Some looked hopeful. Others looked nervous. Daniels and Reed remained seated, staring at the empty judge's bench. For the first time, they truly understood that their actions had consequences far beyond that rainy night. In her private chamber, Angela stood alone for a moment. She looked out the window at the crowd outside. Years of hard work had brought her here, but this decision was not personal. It was about justice. When she returned to the courtroom, everyone stood again. Silence returned instantly. Angela sat down, opened the file in front of her, and prepared to speak. And in that moment, the entire courtroom held its breath, waiting to hear words that would change everything. The courtroom was completely silent. No one moved as Judge Angela Brooks looked down at the papers in front of her. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, every person in the room held their breath. This moment had been building since the night of the arrest. Angela lifted her eyes and looked across the courtroom. Officers Daniels and Reed sat still, their faces serious. The witnesses sat quietly behind them. Reporters held their pens ready. "This court has carefully reviewed all evidence and testimony," Angela began. Her voice was calm but firm. She spoke slowly, making sure every word was clear. She explained that the law gives power to police officers to protect people, not to control them. That power requires discipline, fairness, and respect. When those values are ignored, trust between the community and law enforcement begins to break. The courtroom listened in complete silence. Angela explained that the body camera footage and witness testimony showed that the arrest had no strong legal justification. She stated that the officers allowed assumptions to guide their decisions instead of facts. Daniels closed his eyes briefly. Reed stared forward, unmoving. "The court finds that the arrest violated proper procedure," Angela said. "This matter will be referred for internal disciplinary action and further legal review." A quiet reaction spread through the room. Some people nodded. Others simply exhaled, as if releasing tension they had carried for weeks. Angela continued speaking. "This ruling is not about punishment alone. It is about accountability. The law must apply equally to everyone, including those who enforce it." Her words carried weight beyond the walls of the courtroom. She then addressed the larger issue. She spoke about how justice works only when people are willing to face uncomfortable truths. Mistakes must be acknowledged before trust can be rebuilt. For the first time, Daniels looked up. His expression showed regret, not anger. Reed slowly nodded, understanding that the decision was final. Angela finished the ruling and struck the gavel gently. "This court is adjourned." The sound echoed through the room, marking the end of the case. Outside, reporters rushed forward as people exited the courthouse. Cameras flashed. Questions filled the air. Some called the decision historic. Others called it a lesson the city needed. Angela left through a side exit, avoiding the crowd. She did not seek attention or praise. To her, this was simply her responsibility. As she walked down the courthouse steps, the rain began again, light and quiet, just like the night everything started. For a moment, she paused and looked at the sky. Weeks earlier, she had sat in the back of a police car, misunderstood and judged without being heard. Now, she had spoken not as a victim, but as a judge guided by the law. Across the street, a young girl watched her with admiration. The girl's mother whispered something to her, and the child smiled. Angela noticed and returned a small, gentle smile before continuing on her way. The story spread across the city in the following days. Not as a story of revenge, but as a reminder. Justice is strongest when it remains fair, even when emotions run high. The officers faced consequences, and the department announced new training and review policies. Conversations about fairness and responsibility began in places where silence once existed. And Angela Brooks returned to her courtroom, continuing her work quietly. Because for her, justice was never about winning. It was about making sure the next person would be treated with dignity. The narrator's final words echoed softly. Sometimes, the people underestimated the most are the ones who remind the world what justice truly means.